Taking a deep breath in, coming into this beautiful moment. Here we are. Welcome, YouTubers, and welcome again, our audience today, our gathering of peace. I'll take one more breath. Thank you all so much for being here. Excellent. So as usual, I write things in our little handout, but then I always come up with other things to talk about. And one of these days they'll combine, but we don't have a printer, so I always have to print these ahead of time. And so I always just kind of write, you'll see here, I always write a fun lot of little notes in the corners all over which place like a wild man. But before we jump into Mastery of Thought, which is today's topic, I wanted to just share a personal thing I've been chewing on within myself, where I've had there's been exciting thoughts in my mind lately. I'm someone that always enjoys planning for the future and creating more things to bring people together and yada, yada, yada. And what happens there is anytime I get caught up in excitement towards the future, I can't sleep. Or my mind is more distracted during the day and my main chores don't get done. Ever since Andrew has been away, I'm like, I'm gonna clean the house. Has the house fully been cleaned? Not yet. I start and then I stop and then I get distracted and do something else. And so it's just so fascinating and this is a huge teaching I teach in my book, is excitement is not peace and pleasure is not happiness. Excitement is not peace and pleasure is not happiness. Some of you have heard me say that before, but this is just another real life example of why excitement is not peace and how we can get so caught up in planning for tomorrow or the next week or the year ahead or just anything that we're looking forward to, where it completely takes us out of the present moment and doing what actually will help you in the moment on a day-to-day basis. And so last night, I really took a step back and got myself really inspired, pumped up by listening to some show tunes and some music from movies that I love that's really inspiring, like The Greatest Showman and August Rush, and even the Sister Act. I love the Oh Happy Day moment. I was watching that video last night. And so I was just dancing on the other side of this wall at like 2 a.m. And then after I felt that inspiration boost, I started reading more Thich Nhat Hanh. And then after reading a couple stories, it then inspired me to write a very long post, which some of you may have seen, all about arriving in each moment. And so what was beautiful is that even though the past week I've been excited, there's also been anxiety and uncertainties and all these things going on just within my own mind with planning some things. And last night was probably the first moment all week that I would say I fully touched inner peace this week. I would say on average, I'm a pretty peaceful guy. And even though I no longer spill on other people in a harming way, it doesn't mean I'm always in balance. You may not be able to see that I'm out of alignment slightly, but on average, if I'm not fully grounded in the moment, there is a little bit of separation between the mind and body. Now, years ago, it's very noticeable. And I think all of us can attest that we know when we're really out of alignment, our mind and body, we're hastily rushing towards one thing and then we're doing another thing. If something triggers us, we react or we're speaking in a tone. It's no longer like that for me, at least anymore, at least presently. So it's really subtle to catch where my mind goes off in a distance. And what I have to start paying attention to is that, am I getting done what I set out to do in the day? Or am I getting distracted and doing something else, even though it's coming from a place of happiness, even though it's coming from a place of, excitement, of pleasure. And so that's the ego trap that we have to look out for moving forward into the future. Maybe you do get your shit together and you're very peaceful on a day-to-day basis and you're not really hastily spilling on to things or creating a lot of drama in your life, but maybe even what you think is joy is actually detracting from your own peace in your day-to-day chores and your day-to-day interactions, and making sure that you're really, really alive each day, step by step, rather than excitedly shooting into the future. Does that make sense? Previously, I was always living in the past, and there's where my suffering was coming from. And there was a while the future was actually an anxious, kind of, fearful thing. But now it's turned more into an exciting thing. And so we have to make sure that always, 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 also excitement is not peace. And so again, that's just a unique perspective that I wanted to throw out there and start with today. And it does lead into our sermon. But again, you really don't normally hear that message that says, look out for excitement, people. Because a lot of us think it's this really, really juicy, delicious thing, and we want to live in that state consistently. But it really can become a detractor towards living with awareness and mindfulness on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis. So let's breathe that in. So let's see, now that I start with that, where do I want to go from here? So in a nutshell, we'll just kind of share, and this is just an excerpt from my Dunasha Living Peace student program, because I always kind of have an outline where after we do a lot of the homework and the journaling work and I do the coaching with the clients, I always like to do an overview, or with the students, I always like to do an overview. And one of the first little nuggets that I have them memorize and reflect back on is mastery of thought. Just a little excerpt. Our thoughts sculpt our reality. Thus, we learn to master them and become the observer behind our mind. We direct our thoughts versus them controlling us. Perception is fluid. For those of you writing notes, just a wonderful thing is directing thoughts versus controlling them, because that's another ego trap that we get caught up in. If we're trying to control our thoughts, we're still in the egoic mind of trying to manipulate reality, and we're going to get frustrated. Who's ever tried to control your mind or just stop? You just tell it to stop. Like it's hard and it doesn't work. And so that's why we recognize that the mind never stops. Really, consciousness is always flowing. So rather than controlling it and trying to manipulate it, we simply direct it. We simply change focus. We simply point it in this direction and it starts to flow fluidly. And again, another thing I wrote down there was perception is fluid. Perception is fluid. Perception is fluid. Perception is fluid. Absolutely everything you interact with on a daily basis is activating your perception. And that's where your ideas come from. Your likes, your dislikes, your moral judgments, your duality, your aggression, your peace, your patience, your compassion, all of it is perception based. And what's beautiful is that the more you practice these teachings and the more you live this work, you actually really gain the ability to create your perceptions for yourself, rather than just life hitting you and happening to you. And now you have this perception that is often quite negative. And if it's quite negative, it's quite separating. If it's quite separating, it's quite draining. You are able to shift that perception around and turn any situation into one of compassion, learning, growth, patience, etc. And for those of us who wear the black robes, one defining feature of wearing the black robes is that we're really okay with pain. We become very intimate with pain and we're okay with it and we no longer fear it. And that alone, that power to no longer resist pain and discomfort is one of the greatest, I would call a superpower. It's one of those superpowers that allows one to maintain their peaceful energy and to show up even in those difficult circumstances and still be in alignment and create bridges with communication, rather than showing up in difficult situations or not showing up, but showing up in difficult situations and losing your shit and then reacting aggressively or defensively towards someone that also might be out of alignment. Because let's face it, the rest of your life you're going to interact with a lot of people, and not all those people are going to be in harmony with themselves or with you. And if every time they're not in harmony you lose your balance, that's not a lot of stability there, is it? And then you have the rest of your days kind of funky, then it might throw off your week, and then you might speak in a tone to someone else because of this other situation, and you create this domino effect and it's influencing other people. And so we're all just like little pebbles in a pond that are creating ripples. And so that's why this work is so important, because it teaches us how to create ripples of peace rather than ripples of frustration or ripples of insert any word that might be leading to some friction, if that makes sense. So let's breathe that in. And so I want to share a story. Again, this is one of my favorite books, At Home in the World by Thich Nhat Hanh, Stories and Essential Teachings from a Monk's Life. One of these days, this inspired me to maybe write a book like this, where it's just like every 1 or 2 pages, it's just own unique story from his life, where he shares just a teaching. And so this one's really, really juicy. So it's called Give Me Some Tobacco. Not something you'd think to find in a monk book. In recent years, prisons have had access to books on meditation, magazines, and even recordings of mindfulness talks. I often receive letters from prisoners, usually from prisons in North America. One inmate wrote to me saying, quote, "When I stand at the top of the staircase and look down, I see other inmates running up and down, and I can see their suffering, their agitation. I wish they could do what I do and walk up and down the staircase in mindfulness, following their breathing. When I do that, I feel peace within myself, and when I feel peace within myself, I can see very clearly the suffering of the other inmates." Another time I heard from a prisoner on death row who had received 2 copies of one of my books, Bring Peace. He himself had enjoyed the book and had started practicing sitting meditation in his cell. One day, the fellow in the cell next to him banged on the wall and shouted, asking for tobacco. Although the prisoner who meditated didn't smoke anymore, he still had some tobacco. He took the first page of Bring Peace, wrapped up some tobacco in it, and sneaked it to the other side with the hope that the other person might enjoy reading Bring Peace. He just gave a small amount of tobacco he had, and the next time his neighbor asked for more, he gave him page 2. Then page 3. Finally, he had transferred the whole book, page by page, to the other prisoner. In the beginning, his neighbor had banged and shouted and cursed, but soon he became much quieter. Eventually, he became very calm. On the day his neighbor was released, as he passed in front of his cell, they looked at each other and together recited a sentence from the book, which they both knew by heart. Deep breath. It is clear that punishment is not the only solution to crime. There are much more effective and compassionate things we can do to help those who have broken the law. I was once asked to write a letter of encouragement to a prisoner named Daniel, who was on death row in Jackson, Georgia, in the United States. He was 19 when he committed his crime and had spent 13 years, his entire adulthood, behind bars. He had read a book of mine and found it very helpful as the time of his execution was drawing near. I sent Daniel a short handwritten note that said, in my part, "Many people around you have a lot of anger, hate, and despair, which prevents them from getting in touch with the fresh air, the blue sky, or the fragrant rose. They are in a kind of prison. But if you practice compassion, if you can see the suffering in the people around you, and if every day you try to do something to help them suffer less, then you are free. One day with compassion is worth more than 100 days without it." Deep breath. Excellent. And what's beautiful is that if Dunchie Emma, the other black robe, one of our other black robes, was here today, I would actually have her share some stories, because when I first met her, she was writing notes to inmates on death row. And that was part of her peace work, and she still continues to do so today. And interestingly enough, now she's in a job where she's actually at a prison and monitoring and helping people. And so it's beautiful that it's a job that a lot of people don't resonate with, but because she's always bringing her essence and her peace into it, she can find a lot of beauty there and share that energy with everyone, not only the inmates, but also the guards there. So just her presence of mindfulness being there creates an energy. And Thich Nhat Hanh, actually, in another story of his, said, it was just a fun little story that just said, how do you know if Buddha is on the bus? How do you know if Buddha is on the bus? And the answer was, if one person out of 30 people on the bus is breathing in mindfulness, then Buddha is present. And really what that means is, for people who don't know or understand Buddha, might be a weird story, but really just what that means is that it's just the energy of awakefulness, the energy of awareness. And so Buddha represents a man who achieved enlightenment, or if you don't even want to say enlightenment, you can say liberation from suffering or just inner peace. And so it shows that an ordinary person was able to achieve that. And in Buddhism, it teaches that we're all capable of that. And so that's just what Buddha represents. And so when you ask, is Buddha in the prison? Now he is, with Dunchie Emma being there. And so that's pretty powerful, isn't it? And even with these individuals who were on death row from the story, Buddha was in that cell with them, breathing mindfully. And so I just love that. I love that. I love that. Let's breathe that in. So one day of compassion is worth 100 days without. And I think that is another softening awareness that brings, opens up our heart a little bit. Because who suffers mentally or emotionally or physically on a day-to-day basis. I'm sure all of us suffer to some extent on a day-to-day basis. And it almost just feels like that's our waking reality and we never get to escape it. And something I've been teaching students lately is that you're right, maybe it will never fully go away. And that's okay. But even amidst your own suffering, if you practice mindfulness, you can start to develop compassion, not only for yourself, but for other people. Because when you slow down, you're going to see other people suffering. And when you see other people suffering, it can't help but open up your heart. And I think that's the morality. We really don't teach morality here. We simply teach peace and pain. Not right, wrong, good, bad, just peace, pain. That invites our own peace so that we can be present for others. And something I've been writing and contemplating about a lot lately is, hot damn, no matter what country you're from or what religion or political group you're from, we all fucking suffer. And that is one of the most unifying components of humanity. The most unifying component of humanity is that we're all in this together and we're all just trying to figure out how to suffer less. And a lot of times in our ignorance, in our fear, because ignorance leads to fear, we point at the people around us and we say, you're the cause of my suffering and I hate you for it. Think about that. There might have been people in your own life that you have, maybe not knowingly, but you hated, even in your own marriage, maybe just one day or a week or a month or a year, you actually hated your partner because you felt that they were the cause of your suffering. And if they had just stopped, you would be able to catch a breath. If they just understood you, you would be able to catch a breath. So hate often arrives from the fear and the ignorance of our suffering and our own defensiveness of trying to just say stop and to push the thing away that we believe is the cause of that friction within ourselves. But when we really get to understand it and we really slow down a little bit and we return to our breath and we become much more attentive, we're going to also know that their friction that they're causing us is actually coming from their own wounded heart, and that we can find compassion in that together and we can open up a dialogue in that together. But what happens is most people don't open up those dialogues because we're so caught up in our own neurosis of trying to defend our own self, trying to defend our own peace, trying to aggressively push away the things that bother us, push away the thorns of life. And then the dialogue, the communication never occurs. So let's breathe that in real quick. So I want to read one more short story from this book, and it's called One Step. And this is what actually led into the creation of the post that I shared online last night around 3 a.m. One day on a teaching tour in China, our delegation from Plum Village had an opportunity to climb the sacred Wutaishan mountain. Our tourist guide had led many groups, perhaps even hundreds of groups, up the mountain. But on that day, we proposed that instead of leading, she would follow us, because we had our own way of walking. At the foot of the mountain, I gave instructions as to how to walk. Breathing in, we make one step. Breathing out, we make another step. Because there are thousands of steps and we want to enjoy every step, our aim is not to get to the top of the mountain. Our aim is to touch peace and joy with every step. We had to walk on the right side of the steps as we climbed. Many groups overtook us. They would turn around and glare at us, trying to see who it was that was moving at a snail's pace up the mountain. It was not easy for our guide. I remember the walk very clearly. I would breathe in and put my left foot on the step, and then I breathe out, bringing up my right foot. We were able to do it in such a way that pleasure and joy were possible with every step. We stopped every 10 steps to have a look down and enjoy the view and continue to breathe. Then we would continue on. When we arrived at the top of the mountain, we were not tired at all. In our delegation, there was a nun who could speak Chinese, and on the bus, she overheard the tourist guide telling her colleague, "This monk is amazing. I have led hundreds of groups up the mountain. I always arrived exhausted. But today, for the first time, I arrived feeling refreshed. He really is incredible." At that time in China, the tourist guide had to submit reports to visitor activities to the police. She went on to say, "I have finished my report on what they did and what the monk said today, but I haven't submitted it yet because what he said was so interesting. I wanted to read his notes one more time." So the moral of the story, and it goes on a little bit, just sharing that you can bring that step-by-step mentality to everything that you're doing, whether you're going to the grocery store, whether you're just walking in your own dairy home, whether you're walking the dog, even when you're just getting up at the beginning of the day and you take your first step on the side of your bed, bringing your full awareness to it. That is the essence of the font of energy, if you will. They don't go on to say that particularly, but I do find it interesting that even though it took them twice, triple, quadruple the amount of time to get to the top, they arrived not tired. And they arrived in a way that they were able to be alive through every single step. Because how many of us have gone on a hike and then our mind just goes in any which direction and we get to the top of wherever we were going and we're just like, where did the time go? Because even though we were maybe peaceful and enjoying it, chances are our mind was probably going from one thing to the next thing to the next thing to the next thing to the next thing. And so think about all of us in this room who feel exhaustion on a day-to-day basis. Who feels exhausted from time to time? Well, we're probably taking on maybe a little bit more than we actually have to in a day. But also, chances are, every step we're taking, we're trying to rush through it. Every moment that we're living, we're trying to rush through it. And that takes more energy. It's almost like we're trying to live 2 or 3 steps in just one step. And so it's like we're running and rushing from moment to moment rather than enjoying every second of it. And I think that's a really important part of mindfulness, and what we're learning to develop here is to enjoy every second, because only the present moment contains life. Let me repeat that. Only the present moment contains life. Not yesterday, not tomorrow, not worrying about some situation that you can't control in the present moment. Only this moment contains life. And so I like to invite my students to really recognize fact from fiction. You know, what is the fact in this moment? The fact in this moment is that we're surrounded in a peaceful, we're in this building that's very peaceful. But I guarantee every single one of you in this moment can think about something that will cause stress, right? We can all pull something out of somewhere. But that doesn't exist in this moment. We can say that it does, and it will feel like it does because we invoke it. But in this moment, this is enough. We don't need to worry about what is to come. We don't need to try and solve the karma of the past. Right here, right now, this moment is enough. And that's where liberation comes from. That's what brings us back into the moment of our peace. Let's breathe that in. And so the mantra that I am starting to use that I came up with last night was, with every step I arrive to greet my life. With every step I arrive to greet my life. And breaking that down, with every step, parentheses, and every moment, I arrive, parentheses, which is the mind-body presence. I arrive with my mind and body being in harmony. To greet, which is to welcome and to appreciate my life, which is the miracle of aliveness. And so I also went on to share that another powerful mantra is to say to yourself every second of every day, if you want to, this moment is enough. Taking another step, this moment is enough. Taking another step, this moment is enough. Taking another step, this moment is enough. And again, I think a lot of people, especially Westerners, would challenge this. And they might say, well, you're going to become lazy. You're going to become very unproductive. But what's fascinating is that the true form of unproductivity, or the true form of laziness, arrives from our lazy thinking. It arrives from our messy or sloppy thinking, where we're always trying to do a million things in our mind every single day, where we don't get to enjoy a single moment of aliveness in just one day. So yes, we might be super busy, but even ants are busy creatures. Even ants, they work tirelessly and they never stop. So the real question is, what are we busy for? Are we busy actually enjoying and living our lives with that full aliveness and being present with our loved ones and showing up fully at our work? Or are we constantly in resistance to absolutely everything that's happening, that's going on? You turn on the news, you find resistance. You look at your partner, you say, ugh. Then you just turn away, and then you look at all your to-do lists, and you're like, geez. And then you're just always shifting your focus from one thing to the next thing, and it just never stops. And the truth is, absolutely, it never stops, but it doesn't mean that you can't find enjoyment along the way. And the reason that we can't find enjoyment is that we're constantly taking life for granted. We're forgetting the miracle of aliveness in every single second. And anyone who's been through a massive amount of pain, we can still recognize the miracle of aliveness in this moment because there's plenty of things to be grateful for. Just looking around, looking at a loved one, looking at the blue sky above. Just as Thich Nhat Hanh was teaching those prisoners that were on death row, that there was still beauty to be found in the aliveness that exists within them and that they could practice breathing. Isn't that profound right there? But then some of us, if not all of us, will go into our day tomorrow and we're going to forget this teaching. And we're going to get caught back up in the trap of our busyness. And then we're going to do it the next day, and then the next day, and the next day. And by the time we're on our deathbed, we're going to look back and we say, there's plenty of things that I appreciated and I did, and I'm proud of my accomplishments. But I definitely wish I would have slowed down a bit. And I really wish I could have just one more moment with this person, or maybe just one more moment with this person who actually maybe passed away 10 years prior. And so what's funny is that when you're at your deathbed, what you're going to be thinking about is just one more moment with ... And what's fascinating is that right now, the way that we're living our lives is to get through these moments fast enough. Even though when we're about to transition into non-physical, the number one thing that we're going to be wanting is not to put one more accomplishment on our bucket list, but to actually have one more moment of presence with the people that we care about. Or maybe even just the presence with being in nature and feeling the aliveness of the miracle of this life. Pretty profound stuff. Let's breathe that in. And so to bring it all home, I just tie this in with mastery of thought and shared this teaching with this tenet from my book, Living Peace, simply because it all does go back to our perception and how are we directing the flow of our consciousness. Are we allowing life to direct the flow for us? Are we allowing the circumstances of our lives to dictate how we feel? Are we slowly taking back that agency over our lives and saying, yes, all of this is happening, but I'm still going to show up and take a step and greet life. And then I'm going to take another step and greet life. That all starts with an ability to direct our consciousness of our mind, to direct our awareness and refocus it on a day-to-day basis. So let's breathe that in. So I'll recite it one more time. With every step, I arrive to greet my life. With every step, I arrive to greet my life. With every step, I arrive to greet my life. Deep breath. And thank you. Excellent. So that concludes our sermon for today. I want to thank all of you, the YouTubers who are watching this after the fact. And as always, please hit that subscribe button. That always is a great way of showing that you're enjoying these videos, and hitting the like button. And for those of you, if you feel inspired to comment down below, that is always really beautiful to hear your thoughts on how anything stuck out to you for today's sermon. And as always, there's links below to our website, Patreon, and PayPal if anyone would be so kind to offer some donations. Thank you, and see you next week.